All right, everybody. So I want to welcome Charron Sumler onto the podcast. And um, I usually like to, I will have a little bit of an intro that I post before this already. But if you want to give just a brief introduction to kind of who you are and just what you're all about.
Absolutely. So again, my name is Charron Sumler. I'm athletic counselor at The Ohio State University, where I provide mental health counseling to student athletes. Previously, I've worked at other universities, kind of doing more higher education crisis management. Also worked with incarcerated and homeless youth. And I'm a former college basketball player, so definitely use that experience to inform my clinical approach.
Awesome. Okay. And what was it that kind of got you into the more psychology field? Like, what was it that really inspired you to want to step into that direction?
Yeah, it started off pretty kind of pretty general. My mom was getting her master's degree in counseling while I was in high school, and so I think just through conversations and exposure to the field in that way. Then I took a couple of psychology classes in high school, so I was like, yeah, this seems like a good fit. At the time, I wasn't aware of sports psychology as a field, so through undergraduate studies, I did more psychology classes and had some internships that really allowed me to narrow in on counseling and specifically how to blend athletics and sport and counseling.
Got it. Okay. And so you said in terms of sport. So what did you kind of do with sports on your own in your own career, like before you stepped into kind of the psychology realm and the helping realm?
Yeah, so I mean, I started playing sports as a young kiddo. I was a military kid, so I moved like 7 times before the age of 18, which even when I say it out loud sounds like kind of wild. But sports was the constant that whole time. So, joining new teams, new sports. I didn't really get stronger in my like basketball identity until the 7th, 8th grade area, but got to dabble in a lot of different sports, which I think helped kind of build confidence, helped me like assimilate to different communities and learn about the places I was living in.
Mhm.
But it wasn't, like I said, until middle school that I was like, wow, I'm pretty good at basketball and this is exciting. And I wanted to play basketball in college. I didn't have any goals past the collegiate level. But yeah, it's kind of how I got into sports, really was from being a military kid.
Got it. And you're able to play at an NCAA level, I believe, right?
Yeah, so I played at a Division II school, St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas.
Awesome. That's great. And so at that point, did you kind of have any kind of inspiration to really want to step into the kind of therapist area? I'm assuming you went for a psychology degree at that point.
Right. So in undergrad, I did my psychology degree, my master's degrees in counseling, but it was our volunteer coach, actually. He was a sports psychologist. That's kind of the first person I met and kind of first got introduced to it. But he was much more on the research side, less on like the clinical side. So unfortunately, he left after my sophomore year. So I just kind of got that like really superficial, touch the surface kind of introduction to it. And I did a couple of research projects in undergrad of I think one time I was looking at the perception of exertion in workouts based on the beats per minute in the music that was playing. So I'd have athletes like, bike to slower country songs versus like more upbeat, house songs or something, and kind of determine if their perceived level of exertion changed based on the music. So that's like kind of the earlier stuff that I was doing. But then I realized I really wanted to like do the more clinical work. So I got my master's degree in counseling.
Oh, very cool. And I can't pass up but ask a little bit about that research with the music. Was there any kind of significant findings that you kind of noticed? Because I'd like to take that out and kind of experiment myself with maybe some of the info you got from that.
Yeah, and at that level, it was pretty introductory research, but essentially we found that the higher BPMs for the songs, the lower perceived exertion was of the workout. And then there were some factors of like what type of music you already listened to, and if you listened to something new, your level of exertion also was higher, just based on like not being as familiar with the music or the tempo or that kind of thing.
Interesting. So almost being more comfortable with the music and then having the higher BPM kind of led to feeling like you weren't working as hard.
Right, because you're kind of having fun, you're kind of, in your distracted kind of mental zone of, in the zone of the music, less the workout.
That's very cool. Yeah, I'm sure there's definitely lots of factors that play in, but I will definitely consider
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, cool. And I guess back to the kind of storyline of how you got into psychology and working with players. So, what is it that you kind of are doing now coming out of school? And obviously now you're working at Ohio State. So, what is it that you really focus on there?
Yeah, so we really focus on wellness. That's kind of the model that we're looking at. So it can be anything from performance related concerns in an athlete's sport, or personal issues, or academic concerns that they're having. So we're really trying to destigmatize mental health and allow our services to be more approachable and open. And so we're trying to show student athletes that it's not just something's wrong with me, I need to see someone. It's kind of like, hey, like, how's your sleep going? Let's kind of talk about that. Or, how's your relationship going? Because, sometimes relationship concerns can impact us in our sport. So right now I'm really providing kind of individual counseling sessions to student athletes. And then also I do a lot of team talks where I go in and discuss a topic with the team. Maybe it's meditation, maybe it's stress management, a variety of topics, relationships. But that's kind of the bulk of it. I guess I would say I split my time in that way. And then I also kind of float around and just want to be more visible so that athletes can see, that we're regular people, we, rock some cool Nikes and we chat about music and not be so sterile or like, kind of stuffy in a hospital setting.
That was actually what I wanted to ask was, is there anything specific you're doing, maybe that you didn't mention there, to really kind of bring that maybe comfortability and kind of make people more familiar and happy to step into working with a psychologist and working on their mental side of the game? Is there anything you guys are really focused on to make that happen?
Yeah, so COVID definitely, as it did with everyone, had us adjust quite a bit. And so over this past year, we've worked to build more virtual content. We've worked to engage more on our social media platform, which just released about 2 months ago. So really trying to put different fun like wellness challenges out there, or different hashtags to get people engaged with us like in that way. And I don't know that we would have done that if it wasn't for COVID. I think we might have just kept on with the like kind of traditional route of being around and doing sessions, but it's been really fun to expand in that realm.
That's very cool. So what is it that you're kind of doing, or what is it that you've really gotten from doing this work? Like, what have you learned working with college athletes, and what are some of maybe like the kind of top things that you've learned and noticed in those athletes?
Yeah, I would definitely say, and again, with COVID, the resilience. I just am thinking back to like 12 months ago when, everyone's seasons were halted. And I mean, at that time I was like, I don't even know if we're gonna, have sports for years, potentially. You just didn't know. And to have, not that we're completely on the other side, but we're in a different place than we were 12 months ago. And to see folks going to the Olympics and like really getting after their dreams, like it's incredible to like zoom out and think about like gyms and training centers were closed this a whole time, and people are killing it in their sport. So that's amazing to see. I think their resilience. I think also it's funny, but the first thing when I first stepped into this role, I'm 6 foot, and so I'm a pretty tall woman. But it is. I mean, some of our athletes are 6'5", 6'9", and the perception is like, wow, they're so like big and strong. Surely, like they've got it together. They're great in their sport. But really getting to sit down with these athletes and seeing them as 18, 19-year-olds who are really struggling with some different things. So I think the reminder to myself is don't judge a book by its cover.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a interesting thing because a lot of times people forget that these players are so young. Like I know sometimes as I was kind of going through junior hockey as like 16 to 20 years old, and I'd listen to people just be like screaming, swearing at these guys, and it's very easy to forget that players are really just kids just transitioning into real life. And are there any techniques or things that you use to try to kind of help these players like deal with that kind of stuff, where the stresses that come with transitioning into such a like a high impact, high stress situation when again, like sometimes these players are like 18 years old stepping into a Division I program, and now you have what feels like, I'm sure for some players, the stress of the world kind of on their back.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we use a lot of different, specific clinical approaches based on each athlete's needs, but I would say generally I'm trying to be like a voice of reason and wisdom, because everyone that surrounds these athletes, including their families, has expected high performance, like has seen them as elite, all-American athletes. And so and not that I'm trying to burst their bubble, but I really try to say like, yes, you are that, and it's okay to struggle with your relationship, or it's okay to to talk about some of the things you experienced in your childhood. So I try to, normalize, their experiences. You can be an elite athlete and also feel the things that all humans feel. Like those two things can exist together.
Yeah, no, that's one thing that I try to bring up to players that I work with, is this idea that the success you have off the ice with the people around you and feeling good and feeling comfortable is way more important than a lot of people want to consider. Like it's very easy to say, oh well, like I don't care if my parents are mad at me or my friends don't like me. It's as long as I play well. But oftentimes the stress can, like, it's so easy to carry over into your game.
It is, and especially when I'm imagining like for you at junior hockey, like you're playing all day. So I mean, it's essentially the amount of that you would do for a job. And so to think that you can just leave some of that stuff at the door for 10, 12 hours a day is impossible, and certainly not something that should be expected.
Yeah, it's a very high demand sport. I guess like in many sports they require more than just that, like say 90 minutes of that game. It's you're there 2, 3, 4 hours before, you're there a couple hours after. It's a significant portion of your waking day is allocated to these things, right?
Absolutely. And so I try to help, and just thinking about the way you explain that schedule, is I really try to help athletes maximize the time that they have. There's not a lot of time. So just thinking about like, you have 3 hours that you're, at the facility, stretching, warming up, doing that kind of stuff before your game. Can we insert some mindfulness there? Like, where can we increase some wellness in the things you're already doing?
Right. Got it. With that, like, are there some kind of core tools that, I know you said obviously each player is individual, they have their own the techniques you use with them, but are there some core tools that you want to highlight for players to maybe even do their own research on if they don't have access to a sports psychologist?
Sure, sure. So mindfulness, as I was just sharing, is a big one, and I think that's one I probably like encourage everyone to use. And for some people, they're not, that's not interested in it or not ready to dive into it. But I really think the more we can help people in general and athletes, it's almost, I call it like, if you can visit that place of peace, you'll be able to activate it on your own more. So you just got to keep going there, and it's more of a long-term thing. It's not a, you do it today and tomorrow you're going to feel great. So mindfulness is definitely one I encourage. Stress management overall, which mindfulness can be an approach to stress management, but really just sitting down. Sometimes we're just so go, go, go that we don't even realize how much we're actually stressed about. So helping them really, sit with themselves and their bodies and take stock of like, what is on my plate? What are my demands? And is it something I can do realistically, all of this? And I guess I would say lastly, the idea of having a growth mindset and being open to new experiences, and really more than open, but like welcoming challenges and quote unquote failures as tools to succeed.
Right. Okay. And rewinding back to mindfulness a little bit.
Yeah.
So I know for myself, I've done hours and hours of research into it, but I find that it's so helpful for every player to hear someone else's perspective on what it means to apply mindfulness as a tool and how it can be effective. So I guess maybe a good approach, and sometimes I consider it like this, is kind of giving people in somewhat of a sales pitch to why try this? Like, why even consider something that is just like a mental tool? Because a lot of times it's very easy to say, oh, well, why, what's the point of this? So like, what would be your kind of explanation to somebody who says, oh, well, what is this? Why should I do it?
Yeah. I guess I would say, in terms of control. A lot of people say like, no, I don't want to do that. Like, I just want to go, do something more active. But I try to explain that if you can, again, visit that place of peace, that meditative state, and be able to initiate it on your own, that's just so incredibly powerful in workplaces and businesses and your everyday life, parenting, because there's going to be stressors outside of sport everywhere we go. But if you're able to, again, activate that peacefulness, activate that sense of grounding, that'll make you more successful, because the most successful CEOs, presidents, all of that are stress managers. It's basically how well can you manage the stress. And part of that is really slowing down and strategically. So not just like taking a 7-day vacation, but like doing things every day, like mindfulness, to slow down intentionally so that you can stay with the hustle of life.
Okay, got it. And what is a recommendation you give to, I guess, just say a general player, somebody who's kind of the average of the group, to kind of how to use mindfulness? Like, is it a 10-minute meditation? That's something that I typically like to do on a daily basis, but what would you recommend players do?
Yeah, I'll take stock of like how much they're bought into it first before deciding what to prescribe in terms of like a series. But I usually say, give me 7 days, give me 7 to 10 minutes a day, and trying that out and really trying it out, whether it's like you're a morning person or middle of the day or evening, or exploring different ways. I usually say, give me 7 days, 7 to 10 minutes. And I'll usually start people off with guided meditations first to help you know what it is that you're trying to do in that space.
Got it. And is there any specific tools that you found, it could be with like clients you work with, or maybe even things that you've just seen that you recommend to people for like guided sessions, or even just learning about kind of those tools, those mental tools in general?
Yeah. So the Big Ten has paid for the Calm app for all of our student athletes. So that's one that we use and talk about a lot. There's a lot of Calm app, Headspace. Netflix has Headspace, which I've recommended as well, because they have some more, like, it's like a cartoon and a visual, and it walks you through the science behind it, and then you actually get to practice it. So it's kind of like a tutorial, if you will. Spotify is a great one as well if you're looking for access to them. One book that I recommend, it's called The Mindful Athlete. So that's one that I think can be helpful for people wanting to know the connection to sports.
Got it. Yeah, I actually just listened to a podcast from the writer of that book. He's the guy who worked with like Michael Jordan and that team, right?
Right. Yep, that's him.
Yeah, that's where he got very famous from, I would say.
Yes.
Got it. Awesome. Okay. And in terms of kind of like talking about the mental game, like what are some things that you think players can usually like neglect with the mental side of the game? Maybe some things that they don't usually consider, or what they don't usually think about when it comes to kind of optimizing their performance, starting from more of a mental angle.
Yeah. I think sleep, I know I've said that earlier, but sleep is a big one. When we're sleep deprived, in general, our bodies don't function well, but we also don't tend to think very positively about ourselves or the world when we're sleep deprived. So, I mean, I think sleep is a big one, and that can be a struggle conversation for college age students, but it's one that I harp on. I would also say that what we're doing in our off time, so the people that we spend time with, whether that's relationships or family, sometimes there's an expectation that, like, well, yeah, on the weekends, I go home to see my parents or something, but sometimes that can be more draining. So I try to help athletes, again, take stock of what is refueling you mentally and socially, and what is draining you, and really being intentional that maybe having a partner during the season isn't as fun as you thought it'd be, because it's hard to juggle both or something like that. So helping people think about the things outside of sport that are drawing their energy away from their sport.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I've never framed it in that way of kind of what's providing and taking away energy.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Cool. Okay, yeah. And then in terms of, I guess, when looking at players and saying like, okay, this is the time that you should go work with a sports psychologist. This is when you should look to seek help. Now, I know that there's obviously the one side of the coin, which is when there's something like really wrong and you know that it's like significantly impacting your whole life. But then there's obviously also other areas where it can be a little less significant and maybe more performance based. So, like, what would you recommend for players when, I guess, just like when to start to look into working with a sports psychologist if they have access, of course?
Right, right. And yeah, depending on that access, if they have someone available, I would say like at any point, like you have someone available to you. But um, when you start noticing changes, and it's similar like when we go to the doctor, like oh, my knee's been hurting a little bit, but it's okay, I'll keep playing on it, or that kind of thing, and we push it off. Then it turns into a bigger issue. So I would say anytime you start to notice, like I'll have people say, yeah, I mean, I had some shortness of breath for the last like week or two, but I didn't really know what it was. I thought maybe it was the humidity or something, or yeah, I haven't been able to sleep much. I just kind of thought it was, yeah, it could be anything. Yeah, I thought it was just what I was eating or when I was eating, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Not to, I try to encourage them not to justify changes that they notice with their bodies. And a lot of times we as people do, we're like, oh no, that's probably just my body aging or whatever it is. But at any point when you see something, and I'm going to put a number on it, but it's not a hard and fast number, but really, for example, 3 nights of sleep that you're just like not getting it regulated, that might be a good time to think about looking for some external support. The shortness of breath, that's kind of a more concerning one. So I mean, as soon as you notice it, really. So if you start to see changes internally, or you're showing up at practice and it's like, gosh, I hate this and I don't know why. When you start to have those thoughts, it's really, I think it's important to look at them sooner than later.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the crazy things is it's so easy when you're dealing with those experiences to write it off and say, oh, well, maybe this is just a part of the process, or I'm not mentally strong right now. I got to just strengthen that and push through it. But I think it's very similar to, like you said, almost like a doctor or someone like that. When if you notice you're getting a little bit sick, the easy solution is to just go to the doctor, figure out, oh, there's just this one thing I can do to fix it. And would you agree that it's very similar in that sense of sometimes it could be just a one conversation that could solve kind of a lot of stress and negative experience you're going through?
I do. In the way that, we use talk therapy is by having people actually become more aware of what those thoughts are. And sometimes right on their own, they'll say, I do need to take some time away from, a partner, or I do need to and do some more mindfulness. So my goal is really to help them articulate what's going on in a way that they come to a resolution on their own.
Right. Got it. And when you're starting to look for a professional, someone to work with, do you have any tips of kind of how to find a good fit with a professional, where to look maybe, or even when you're looking, what to be looking for?
Yeah, and I think that's a big one that, we're really trying to decrease barriers here on campus, but for sure, just I know it can be cumbersome to search for a provider, a new provider, especially one that you maybe haven't been to that, that field before. So I would start by, assessing what your insurance coverages might be. Usually most insurance companies will have like find a provider, and you can put behavioral health, or going to like Psychology Today is a big one where you can, search by your location, and then thinking about, okay, would I feel more comfortable speaking with male, female, or non-binary person, or would I feel more comfortable speaking with someone closer to my age, or maybe, someone quite a few years older than me. So it's about the fit in the relationship. So it's really assessing like, who would you feel most comfortable demographically speaking to, and then searching that way. And then from there, it's kind of looking for, and for athletes, I would say looking for someone who has experience with athletics, whether they played a sport, coached a sport, worked with athletes before. There are some unique experiences that athletes have that not all clinicians have experience working with.
Got it. Yeah, I think that could be very helpful. And I find myself running into a blind spot of, if I'm not sure where to look or what to look for, I typically will not even bother. So
Right.
that's very helpful.
Yeah.
Okay. And In terms of, I guess, more general advice when speaking, I guess more of, I want to provide an open space to give advice to players who are in the more, let's say, kind of age like 10 to 15 range. I typically, as a hockey player, call it like minor hockey age. But
Yeah.
is there any kind of advice that you'd recommend to players in those kind of younger age groups before they get into what I would say more serious, like major junior or anything like that? What would you kind of say to them in terms of how to kind of improve their performance, their life from your own perspective? And that's a super open question, but I want to leave that space to share what you think.
Yeah, I would really say at that level, and I know again, youth sports has gotten increasingly more competitive every year and at younger ages. But I would say at that level, from a psychological standpoint, it's really focusing on doing the things you enjoy and the sports you enjoy. And really on that early side, that 10 to 12 side, is doing a few sports to have more exposure. Even from a physiological standpoint, I hear that doing different movements helps build a better foundation than just like the same sport for 20 years, and then really, again, we don't want people to get burnt out by the time they get to their dreams. So expanding sports, hobbies, doing things outside of, like, whether it's music or something even outside of athletics to help balance you at that age, I think is helpful and healthy.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's what I'd say for that 10 to 15 age.
Got it. Yeah. And I guess in terms of burnout, that is something that I guess that there was times in my life when I thought that didn't really exist. I used to think that it's like impossible to get sick of something you love, but I definitely do think that has came up for me in the past when I've tried to go like 12 months straight of just like nonstop training for a sport. And I guess in terms of that, I just want to get a little bit more specific. Is there, I guess, any recommendation or advice you give for when you may start to notice that, maybe even as a parent who might be listening to this, maybe when to step in and suggest, hey, this might be a point where you're becoming burnt out or I'm becoming burnt out, and this is a benefit to step into something else?
Yeah, I think the biggest marker is the switch from having loved a sport to dreading going to practice and dreading going to games. That I think, and really, I'll say, like, dreading the game piece can be maybe the most telling sign, because that's usually, that's the most fun, exciting part. That's why we do what we do. But really, for parents too, like, if you have a young, 10 to 15-year-old who used to love being on the ice just all the time, and then like you start to notice like they're not really wanting to go to practice, they're not really wanting to put in the extra time, outside of practice on their own, just asking questions at that point, just like, are you enjoying this? And allowing it, like, kind of allowing the answer to be either way, because it's possible that, a lot of times we don't want to actually answer the question because we're afraid of what the answer might be.
Right.
But I think being willing to like dive into that sense of burnout, because you can do something about it. It's not the end all be all, and it doesn't mean that, your kid's never going to play the sport again. It's just, we might need to take a little break to help them maintain.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's a really big piece to add on to that, is that it could be beneficial. Like it not just, it may help them to not want to quit the sport, but it may actually help them play better when they come back into it, which is huge.
Right.
Yeah. So I guess transitioning to a little bit of an older age group, in terms of junior players. So I consider this, obviously some sports they don't really have this cutoff point, but for hockey players, it's about 16 to 20. So like this was like 2 years ago for me. And I know I've talked about the advice I would give, but what would you recommend to players in this age group? Like what to really consider, what maybe they should be focused on, or maybe what they should focus less on in terms of performance and just overall success in their life?
Yeah, I think that age is a great point to start allowing athletes to make more informed sleep and nutrition decisions for themselves. I think what I see a lot of times is during that time frame, parents or caretakers are providing all the meals and getting them to bed on time, and then when they leave that environment, they have a really hard time doing that stuff on their own. So I think it's good to implement some of those recovery tools at that age and allowing some autonomy at that age, because that'll help them have a foundation, of what they need to recover when they get to more competitive level. And I think also just there's a balance. I think we get really laser focused in that time frame because your goals are like so, at reach, like they're so close, but it requires a lot of drive. And so I think being willing to balance being driven with being flexible, and whether that's, changing teams or flexible with changes in coaches, that's a really good time to start learning some of those adaptability skills.
Yeah, I would agree with that, especially for me, kind of as I was going through the last year or so of my junior career. I went through an experience of putting a ton of pressure on myself to perform at a certain level. I really had expectations, not just like a hope that I'll show up at my best, but there was kind of like I needed to do this. And
Right.
yeah, and I think at that point, that was where that probably would have been helpful. And that was one of the biggest motivations for me wanting to talk about the psychology aspect of sport is it's just so easy to let yourself put that pressure on when like college is right there. If I play just good enough, that's my D1 offer. Like, and that it might be the difference between putting enough pressure on yourself. At least that's how it feels at the time. So
Right.
yeah, is there any recommendation you give to players maybe when they're feeling that way of just putting so much on their plate because they know that that next level is right there?
Yeah, what I've seen to be helpful is having athletes speak with older, folks who have gone through. So speaking to college players, so reaching out and really like asking how they got there. I think having that kind of outside, more mentor type of person that you can talk to about how you're feeling can be helpful, and to give you that reframe, because again, family and friends at that point, at that level, are like, team course, and they're all just as excited and high pressured as you are. So reaching out to someone kind of outside of your circle to help you kind of zoom out a little bit and say like, I'm on track, and giving yourself that grace of I'm very close, but like I need to be able to maintain all the energy I'm putting out to get to the next level and to enjoy the next level. It's not just getting there, it's getting there and still enjoying it enough that you want to keep doing it.
Right. Yeah, and I guess that can reaching out to that kind of mentor type person could be very helpful in setting those expectations in the first place as well.
Right.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, and I guess this is more towards my area and my age group, which is kind of the college athletes, and
Yeah.
obviously where your focus is as well. And what would be the advice you would give to players in this group who obviously you're dealing with, like you're in college, so you're most likely going to be living on your own, transitioning through kind of becoming an adult, and for most people at least. And I think that it's to me the biggest transition that I see with people, biased because I'm in that transition phase. But what advice would you give?
Yeah, I think one thing I hear a lot of elite athletes at this level is I don't feel like my problem is big enough to warrant like talking to someone, or I'm sure there's other people who need the service more. So, it's really trying to I don't know, justify why other people might need it more than we need it ourselves. So the big one I would say for this age group is being confident that you're worthy of support and resources. And so using them and not feeling like, you're taking away or you're putting a burden on the system or on the providers or anything like that. So reaching out for help, because what I find at this age, a lot of times college athletes know when something's going on, they just don't know what to do with it or think it's worth bringing up. So now that we've got this increased awareness in college age athletes, it's like, okay, I'm encouraging you to reach out or talk to someone. It doesn't even have to be necessarily a professional that you start off with. It could be your athletic trainer or nutrition coach or someone you have a relationship with to say, these are things kind of going on. Does this, seem, do I seem different? Do I seem like my mood's changed? Are you noticing anything? And kind of having a sounding board. And then if you need more support, of course, reaching out to a professional. I would also say that stress management piece for college age folks, I think having like that's the beauty of being a student athlete is we're all have been so driven up until this point that we've been so laser focused on the external goals and outcomes and not so much internally. So sometimes I find, college age student athletes to maybe like lack some of that like internal insight because they've been so performative, I guess, in trying to get the job done that they kind of forget about themselves in that.
Got it. Yeah, I totally get that. Yeah, it definitely is that, like I said, that transition, that's what happens at that point. And yeah, I think it's very helpful to look at the opportunities you have to not just go to just right to the top, right to a professional, but there's so many different people in your life that you can look at. And I like that idea that you mentioned in one of the previous questions, which is looking at someone outside of your circle is such a big thing, again, because it's kind of like trying to coach yourself. It's, you have all these biases that exist, and you can't just like take off the filters and then have that conversation with yourself, or oftentimes with a parent. You often need that external kind of perspective to help.
Right. And I think, it can be from, again, not necessarily a professional who can help you build that awareness, but in my role, that's essentially what we do is we are a sounding board. We're asking just very informed and pointed questions to help you assess what your beliefs are about yourself, assess, where you might have some areas for growth in your confidence, or assess what it is about your coach that's frustrating you. And maybe it has nothing to do with your coach even. Maybe your coach reminds you of someone else that you really dislike. So we kind of just use questions and the talk therapy space to help people get it out and really think about it, so we can find like patterns and themes into someone's life.
Got it. And one thing I'd like to finish off on sometimes is this idea of, if you could, and I stole this from another podcast in the past, but it's, if you could have like a billboard that said like one thing, that was a sentence or two that really kind of stood out as something that you wanted people to know, maybe that people don't think about enough, maybe something to remind people of how to live their lives. Is there something you would put on that you really kind of resembles or means something to you?
Yeah, I think one, and maybe this ties into my military background of moving around a lot, is the quote, "You don't have to change your location to change your point of view." So I think sometimes, and I'll elaborate on what that means to me, is a lot of times when we're having a difficult time within life in general, we are seeking external changes. Like, I need to change my job. I need to change my relationship. I need to have more friends, less friends. That's a lot of external stuff that we're trying to shift. And what the quote means to me is, you can also change your life by changing the way you view all of these things. So there are times when we can't move, or we can't get a new job, or we can't get whatever it is. It's less about that part and more about how you view those things. And so that's where I kind of see my role, is helping people expand their viewpoint. Because sometimes it's, we start off very narrow, and it's like, it's this coach that's like, he's the root of my problems. It's just this. And it's like, okay, and your coach isn't leaving and you're on this team. So what can we do to kind of, add some flexibility to that point of view and allow you to feel more comfortable in the circumstances that you're dealt?
Yeah, I think that's awesome advice. And I think that is a perfect place to, I'd say, leave it off. I think that is a very, very powerful thing that I've learned myself a lot, is not staying stuck where you need the external to change. And I think I've tried to force that before with asking for trades or moving to different places. And I think it's advice that I will also absorb as well.
Good. It's a good reminder for me too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Charron. It was very helpful for me, and I'm sure a lot of athletes will get a lot from it. So anything you want to leave off with at all?
No, I think that's it. Thanks, Corson.
No problem.